with we're going to start with Cheryl, and then we'll move on to Dr. Jones and Kimberly. But Cheryl, can you kick us off by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Orr, and what I'd like to say is I have a long history in human resource management as a director and as vice president. I'm mainly in Virginia. I moved to Texas in 2014, and in 2014, I was hired by the city of Dallas to be what they call their ethics and diversity officer. I established both those offices for the city, and I'm very proud to say that both those offices not only are still there, but they have grown tremendously. The diversity office for the city of Dallas is led by what I call a star DE&I professional, and that they have a outstanding equity plan, which if any of you are interested should go out on the Dallas City Hall website and look at the equity plan that they have put together, which deals not only with internal employees, but also with the community. Shortly after working for the city of Dallas, I moved to DART, and I was their vice president of human capital there. Shortly retired from there after a couple of years and started my own firm, which is called Insights HR Partners. And we deal with small and medium-sized businesses around their HR function. But throughout my career, in fact, one of my first jobs, I wrote an affirmative action plan, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But that was very early on and got it through the Department of Education. And so that has always, the EEO function, which is now the DE&I function, has always been a responsibility that I have had in my human resource career. And then probably I've been asked now over the last couple of years to present on DE&I, to help look at policies and procedures, to help establish employee resource groups, and also to work with employers' DE&I committees. And so it's been an important body of work, I call it, and it's been part of my journey as a human resource professional. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Crystal.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Excited to hear more from you in a few minutes. And Dr. Jones, can you please introduce yourself?
I surely will. Good morning, all. I am Dr. Jennifer J.J. Jones, and I currently serve as the Executive Director of Student Development and Engagement here at Southern Methodist University. And I'm also the Director of the Office of Social Change and Intercultural Engagement. And I also serve as the Division of Student Affairs Diversity Officer here at SMU. And I have been at SMU a long time. A very long time. And I think that throughout the years, I've done a lot of diversity work through the different positions that I've held, as well as have overseen. And I think I've done at just about every position you could possibly have, or worked with every office you could possibly have within student affairs here at SMU. I also served for 10 years as the national president of the National Panhellenic Council. Which through that work, I was able to work with all the different councils, which include the NIC, the MPC, which are all of our Greek letter councils for the fraternities and sororities for all across the board, across the gambit. And because of that, I've been called in to do consulting, particularly for our Panhellenic groups, which are traditionally white sororities. But I have done work with all of them, and a lot of my work is geared toward that I do outside of SMU, is geared toward fraternity and sorority life, and how to make those areas inclusive and diversified. I come in, they bring me in a lot when there are things that have went wrong, and I have to come in and recalibrate the organization. But what it's done, it's empowered me. I think through that work, it's empowered me to do my work here at SMU. So it's been very fruitful in what I do and the way that I did it, because it's, and what I hear from the students, a lot of times, because most of the time I'm talking to students, is that the way the conversation starts is a way that is very inviting, and it's not accusatory. It's not, and they feel relaxed enough to have those conversations, because I go in with the mindset of learning from and not just teaching. And I think that has helped me sustain over there. And I'll say I've been here at SMU for 37 years. It'll be 38 years October. I started as a fetus, and I'm going to stick to that. So I'm sticking with that. But it's been very, very valuable work to be able to not only be here at SMU, but go to other campuses across the nation to provide this type of work and be able to talk about issues that are on their campuses. I've been invited to different institutions as they were building out multicultural centers, or even to gauge if they needed those types of centers on those campuses. So I've done a lot of work in this area, and so I'm looking very, very forward to have this conversation with my colleagues, because I think it's going to be great and needed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones is an important and integral leader on our campus, and I'm so glad that she could join us here today. And we're going to turn it over to Kimberly. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here on this panel with such amazing and beautiful and well-talented people. As you know, my name is Kimberly Clarita. I am the Higher Education Policy Analyst at Every Texan, and I serve on the Economic and Opportunity team. So my work really focuses on advocating for and writing policy analysis and bill analysis and written testimonies around student debt, around DEI efforts, around the anti-tenure bills, and different things like that that impact students and faculty members. I will say that my research and data and my academic passions are specifically around looking at racial equity for students across the K-12, the P20 higher ed sector. I got my bachelor's in public policy from UNC Chapel Hill. I got my master's in education administration and policy from the University of Georgia, and I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas at Austin within the education policy and planning program, where again my work focuses on race and racial equity for students. Outside of that, I've served in a lot of fellowships for organizations like the Southern Education Foundation. I've worked with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I work for county governments doing inclusive fellowships and different roles within the government and within nonprofit organizations, just really to work to push for equity work. I've also done research assistance with the UT's Office of Admissions, specifically within what used to be their Access and Inclusion team, doing inclusive conversations with staff members. And so I'm really excited about this work, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're getting ready to have.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly. And our topic of discussion today, as you all know, is going to center on DEI burnout. And DEI burnout, also known as diversity, equity, and inclusion burnout, refers to a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion experienced by individuals who are actively engaged in efforts related to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within organizations and communities. These efforts often involve advocating for underrepresented groups, addressing systemic inequalities, and working to create more inclusive environments. DEI burnout can occur when individuals feel overwhelmed by the challenges associated with advocating for change, especially when progress is slow or met with resistance. So we're going to start the conversation today with where are we now? And I'm going to start with a question for all panelists, and then we'll have some individual questions for each panelist after that. So the first question for everyone, and whoever wants to jump in first, is on a personal and/or professional scale, how would you rate the DEI burnout you are currently experiencing? And whoever wants to jump in first. Or I can pick someone. There, Cheryl. Go ahead, Cheryl.
You know, I'm not being facetious, but I said from a frustration perspective, I'm a 1. And that is because I've spent a lot of years on this journey, on this DE&I, EEO journey. And so there are ups and downs. And I think when you level it out, it probably is, you just have to continue this, on the journey. And somebody said to me a couple of years ago, do you ever think we're going to get to a place where everything is, equal or there's equity? And I said, we've gotten a long ways, and I still think we have a long ways to go. So I think by being steady through our journey, that it helps with the level of frustration.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Dr. Jones, did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, I think, okay, so it said personal and professionally. I think personally, because I have to sometimes compartmentalize my feelings because I will really go crazy. But I think personally, it's probably a 2 with frustration. I would say frustration as well, because as you think over the years that we are still at the place that we are, right? But then when I think professionally, when I think about the opportunities that come with the work that we do, to be able to listen, learn, even for myself, the growth, the personal growth that happens, even in the midst of the chaos that goes on in this work. I'm able to give my all. So professionally is very different. So I would say probably even like a 7. Like it's on the positive side. And I think it's because of the energy that I gain when I'm working with students, when I'm having conversations with colleagues, and a real conversation, authentic conversation, because that gets me real revved up. But then personally, when I go home, it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And I realize it there, but I'd rather be exhausted at home than to be exhausted in the midst of the work.
That's a good point. Kimberly, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, I think honestly for me, it depends on like what's happening in the world, right? Am I getting flooded with like 10 news articles about someone like accidentally being killed, or like it just really depends on what's taking place. I think it fluctuates. Some days I have to remind myself to like be grateful of the space and the time that I am in, right? Like I get to read and write and speak, and I get paid to do that, right? Where my ancestors would get killed for those things, and there was laws against those things. So I'm really grateful for where we are. But there are moments when I'm like, okay, y'all need to pick someone else. I'm tired. Pick someone else. This isn't a burden that I want to carry at this moment. But I'm always passionate about the work. So it definitely just depends on like what's happening in the world, what type of resistance is occurring, and whose voices am I hearing, right? Am I hearing a lot of allies, people supporting, or is it feeling like a silo journey or a silo struggle? So it depends.
Thank you all for responding to that question. And more specifically, Cheryl, I have a question for you. Are there human resource policy changes or institutional restructuring that could help mitigate DEI burnout and promote sustainable change?
Well, yeah, I thought about this a lot. And, EEO sort of started in human resources, the whole from an equity perspective. And as it grew in terms of being more important, it moved out of HR into independent offices. And that's great because that meant that people valued. But HR, I think, has always got to be a partner to the DE&I function and an ally. And I'm going to talk about bit later, but it's important for us. So where the DE&I function is not in HR, then we have to be partners, and we have to figure out how we're going to support folks who are going to be doing the work. And it's hard work, and I know that because I've done it. On the other hand, we also, if it's in HR, then we have to be, it has to be as important as if it weren't. And so what I've often seen is a dotted line between HR and the leadership when the DE&I function is in HR. And we have to be okay with that because it is an important function. And I think right now it's even more important because of what's going on in the world. So from an HR perspective, we have to be allies, and we have to be as supportive. And I say that, it sounds very easy, but I certainly have seen where there's sometimes some conflict between HR and the DE&I function. That's an absolute should not be occurring at all. It should be a partnership. We should be allies to the DE&I function.
Thank you for that perspective. That's really great. And Dr. Jones, this next question is for you. What are the key contributors to burnout in the context of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education?
Coming to work every day. I think that because you're trying to be so many things, particularly when it comes to this work, when you have marginalized students that you're working with, when you have marginalized staff that you're working with, just coming to work. And then when you are in that category as a Black woman, I actually did my dissertation on Black women in higher education. And as I was doing that work and doing my research on that, it's like, it's the same story for us as women. All the women, Black women in particular, is no matter where you are, whatever level you're at, it's always the same story. And there's all the isms that exist in the workplace, in higher education, that you're always fighting against. And sometimes, and you have to think about, some of these isms are people's reality. Like they absolutely think that this is right. What I'm thinking, how I'm thinking is right. And when you are the exception to their rightness, and trying to explain that and having to explain it, or just having to be silenced because you don't want to get in a fight. Like, it's just that it's tiring. It's absolutely tiring. And I think that some people don't have coping skills. It's and then there's a different generation, and on college campuses, there's so many different generations, right? So your cause may be the same. Everybody understand the problem, the issue, the cause, but the way we attack it or address it is so different. So that brings into the burnout, because my generation may want to do that. We want to march. We want to do all this. We got the younger folks may want to burn it down. Let's just burn it down. We don't want to talk about it. And then we have the people that just like, here's the numbers. These are the facts. So how do you bring that together? Nobody wants to give. No one wants to say, okay, let's take all of this that we've collected and try to solve this, where everybody's speaking from the same voice in a sense, but whatever I bring to the table. But I think that people don't have coping skills to be able to deal with all of that. And so they just walk away, or they're silent, or they move on. They just cop out, like, I'm leaving. So if this doesn't work for me here, I'll go to the next thing. And that's just, you just can't live your life like that. You can't run. A lack of communication is another thing. We just don't communicate. I actually did I went to, when we had George Floyd in 2020, what I realized as we were having all these conversations, I realized one thing: Black women and white women don't talk. And so I took it upon myself to go to all the Panhellenic, the white sororities, and say, let me come in and let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Let's put it all out there and talk. And because of that, me coming in on that level, it was able to open the doors for them to communicate with their peers that didn't look like them. So I just think sometimes we just don't open the door. We don't communicate, and we're trying. We want to do the best thing. We want to find ways out. We want to find answers. We want to find solutions. We want to bring understanding, but everybody's not on the same page.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I mean, that's an excellent overview of some of the challenges that we're facing right now in higher ed. And Kimberly, this next question is for you. As most of our members are aware, Senate Bill 17 was approved and requires universities to close their DEI offices. Can you please elaborate on what this bill does, and what does it not mean for our higher education institutions?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess before we start this conversation, it's important to know that, like, when universities were created, they were created when people of color, low income people, female, like people who identify as a female, could not attend these universities, right? They were very exclusive places. And so DEI offices came upon the scene to, like, be a guiding light or to help promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in places that were not, safe emotionally and physically for people of color, low income people, marginalized communities, right? And so that's the work of DEI office, because they really want to make sure that students, regardless of their race, their background, their zip code, that they can go to schools with teachers and people who are going to treat them fairly and treat them right, and they can get this high quality education. And so SB 17, as you said, is what we call the anti-DEI bill. It becomes effective, I believe, January the 1st of 2024, but it demands that all colleges and universities dismantle state-funded student offices on their campuses, right? And so more specifically, colleges and universities, especially the public ones, need to get rid of DEI offices, but they also are prohibited to hiring people to specifically focus on DEI duties. They prohibit the use of DEI statements within hiring practices on college and university campuses. And then they also prohibit the use of DEI trainings unless they are developed and approved by the attorney for state and federal things. Those are like the blanket things that it prohibits. But there are things that it excludes, right? However, this bill is a form of repressive legalism, is a form of laws that scare folk, that they begin to do more than what they need to do, which cause additional harm, right? So while the bill excludes academic courses, research, student organization, guest speakers, and other performances to increase student achievement, postdoc outcomes, data collection, student recruitment, and student admissions, colleges and universities are already starting to pick and pull away at that, right? So there are some colleges and universities that have removed postdoc programs that are rooted in like DEI, or emerging faculty programs that are for underserved populations. They're removing those from their colleges' campuses. They're beginning to remove recruitment events for like student dinners for students of color. Like they're beginning to do more than what has been asked to be done in order, out of fear and out of just wanting to be like in a safe place. And that's the real damage of the bill when we begin. Well, the bill itself is horrible, but it gets worse when we begin to add on these compounding effects. And when the schools fail to comply, the state will withhold funding. If specific members are found not in compliance with it, they can be fired, and then put on, like, a whole list of termination things can take place. And so that's the basics of the bill. I guess for every Texan, we ask that when these bills and policies are coming forth, that we not be silent, that we speak up, that we show up to the Capitol. It's different when like students of color are showing up and speaking out about their experience, but when the chamber is showing up with their business people and saying like, this is impacting our businesses, like that has a little bit more say so, a little bit more power when you are able to call your policymakers and state officials and say, hey, this is going to, although it's a higher education issue, it impacts our workforce. It impacts our ability to recruit and retain people, all people who can do great work. And so we really just need to be careful and mindful of like what it does and does not say, and also know like there are no laws in place that ban businesses and people from using diverse DEI work and practices. And also, like, students, even though race isn't an admissions factor, race can still be taken into consideration in how it impacts students' lives on a daily basis and their student outcomes. And I think we need to keep that in mind as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly. And we've spent this first portion of the panel talking about where we are now. And for this next portion, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about where are we going in these next steps. So this next question is for everyone on the panel. What role does leadership play in either exacerbating or mitigating DEI burnout? And how can leaders create environments that support DEI efforts without causing burnout? So that will be a question for everyone. Can we start with you, Dr. Jones?
Yes. I was just listening what Kimberly says when she talked about people going beyond the cause of the bill, doing more. And I think as leaders, we can't be afraid because I think that fear causes more harm than it does good. And so leaders need to stand on what they believe is true. So I think that every organization has some type of values that may say are talking about difference and inclusion and those kinds of things. And if that's what you believe in, and if that's what you stand on, we need to stand on that from the top down. And we have to model that. We can't live in fear because fear just, again, gets us in trouble. And it just continues to create this gap between the haves, not, all the things that, all these isms, all the things, but they have to stand on what they believe. Stand firm when you say these are our values. Stand firm in that and have conversations. So the leaders, when Kimberly was saying that, we need to have more people going to the Capitol, those leaders need to be at the Capitol. They need to be citing, this is I'm here at this institution, I'm a part of this organization, and we don't stand for this. Because I just don't understand how this can happen. I just don't understand that. If everybody doesn't. Let me take that back. Let me be quiet because I just answered my own question in my mind. So I'm gonna leave it at that. But our leaders have to stand firm on what they believe in, and they need to model the way.
Yeah, model the way. Gets down to that, doesn't it? Cheryl or Kimberly, would you like to add your perspective on that question?
Yeah, let me, first of all, thank you, Kimberly, for that update. I think that was really helpful. I really do. Leaders are critical. And I mean, we always preach this, that leaders are critical in setting the expectations in the workplace. And so but the piece that I want to focus on is that they need to be self-aware. They need to learn and be able to model, as I think JJ just talked about, the behavior that we're expecting. And I use, it's called, Deloitte did a study, and I really think this is important because they did a study of DEI and leadership, a huge, massive study. And they then wrote a report that said, these are the 6 traits that an inclusive leader ought to have. And just to reiterate what you just said, besides being culturally competent, they also said that a leader has to be courageous. So despite things that are happening out there, they have to stand up and say, but in my organization, in my workplace, this is how we're going to operate, and stand firm on that. And some of the others said they have to be committed. And then one of the others that I really, they have to be curious. If they don't know about different groups, about differences, then they need to understand those. And so they have to be curious. So those are just 4 of them. There are actually 6. I use those all the time because I believe if a leader assumes those traits, that then DEI is going to be a valuable part of the organization in which they're leaders in. So that's sort of what I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl. Kimberly, do you have any additional thoughts?
I mean, honestly, y'all two took the whole thing. Which is amazing and great. I would just say that, you know, as leaders, we need to be able to acknowledge harm, right? Harm that has been done, whether or not we are producers of harm, but we need to acknowledge that harm has taken place in some ways. And then include Black voices at the decision-making table, but not place the burden, Black and marginalized students, everyone's including inclusive voice of people at the table, but not also place the burden of fixing whatever inequities there is on those individuals, right? Like, hear me, but I shouldn't be the one to fix a problem that I didn't create, right? And so that's your job as a leader to do. And so like this DEI work and this diversity, equity, and inclusive work that we do is not a Black issue, a poor issue, a low income issue. It is it's an American issue. It's a problem that we all have together, and we all have to take an equal share in doing this work, and not put the onus on people of color or people who identify with a certain specific group. Include their voices, let them determine how much they want to give to it, and then as leaders take the charge for it.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. And Kimberly, I actually have a follow-up question for you. Considering SB 17 and the Supreme Court's decision to reverse affirmative action, what is every Texan currently doing to continue advocating for diverse, quality higher education in the state of Texas?
Yeah, so I think the first part is educating individuals on like what the bill says and what it does not say, right? And knowing that like even though affirmative action, like race within college admissions has been taken back. Again, like I said earlier, it doesn't mean that like a student can't write about how race impacts their life, right? Within the essay, there's different ways to get at that, and so we just need to be mindful of that. And also, the Supreme Court did indicate within the pages, right? The mini pages, like 300 some pages, they did indicate that like diversity is still important. It's something that we need to strive after. So I think those are like key things that we need to keep at the very top. At every Texan, my role is specifically, I am tracking changes that are happening to the state colleges across Texas, which offices are being closed, who's removing postdoc fellows, like all the things, which LGBTQIA plus offices being closed. Like I'm tracking who's being fired, who's being retired, what happened to the people who are working in these places, how are students, like what are students saying, what are they feeling? Like I'm tracking all those changes that are taking place, and working with coalition partners to prepare for next session so that we can be more proactive and not specifically on the defense. I'm also doing debt databases, looking at racial inequity within debt and try to promote debt relief, especially student loan debt relief. We're advocating for an increase of student aid because we know that our colleges and universities are underfunded and students are paying more than the state is providing. We also know that our HBCUs are extremely underfunded and like there needs to be more state investment in those places. And then we're just doing racial equity analysis, equity inclusive analysis of different higher education issues. But then in our K-12 sector, which also impacts our higher ed, we're looking at like these book bans, right? How like are students getting access to an honest and true and accurate education? Are students getting enough funding so that they can go to any university they want to when they get to their senior level? As a college advisor, a previous college advisor, I felt I was playing a numbers game in North Carolina. At the time I got my seniors, like I had to plug in test scores, GPAs, and things. And that's because of systemic issues from schools, like from like not having the funding, not having a full-time teacher in the classroom, things like systemic things that could have been fixed that would have prepared them for success later on in life. So at every Texan, we're definitely taking a holistic approach of ensuring that students are getting the best education possible and tracking that. You're muted.
Hi, thank you. I thought I hit that, but I didn't. Are there successful examples of collaboration between different departments or organizations to alleviate DI burnout? And this question is for Dr. Jones.
Successful examples, though, that exists when the people in these organizations and departments are not the only one doing the work. And it can't be that we are the only ones that can do any type of training, we can't be the only ones. Because when we're collaborating, one of the things that I just pride my office in is that we're always reaching out to other folks. We don't want to be, we are the usual suspects, right? And it's so easy for us to come to us. So even in the work that I do with those Panhellenic chapters, it's like, so now I have given you the okay, it's okay to go out and collaborate with your peers that don't look like you. It's okay, but we cannot be the only ones that's doing the work. We cannot. Other people have to be bought in and understand that, because we did a survey years ago. This was many moons ago, and we talked about, and on that survey it talked about what is your responsibility, how do you engage difference within your area, all that. And some people like, this is not my job. They literally put that in there as their answer. This is not my job. This is the job for so and so and so and so. We need to get over that, because it's everyone's job. And I've come to realize that I cannot, Jennifer J.J. Jones, cannot change the heart and the minds of men, but I can make you think. I can do that. So in me making you think, I need you to understand why it's important that we are all trying to create wholesome, good-natured individuals. That's it. That's it. And we can't just do that alone. It has to be the responsibility of everybody in doing this work. And that's when those collaboration will be successful, where you're not weighing, you do this part because of what you do. Is that we need to get this done. Let's make it happen.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I think that's a really important point. DI work is everyone's responsibility. So I appreciate that. So we've spent some time talking today about where we are now, where we're going. And I'd like to, before we open it up for questions from our participants, I'd like to talk just for a few minutes about what can we do next and hear from our panelists about that. So Cheryl, I'd like to start with you and ask you, in what ways can institutions promote self-care and mental well-being for individuals engaged in DEI work?
Well, this is an important question. It's actually come out of the COVID era that we even think about self-care and mental well-being. And so if we want to say thank you to COVID for anything, it's making us look at those areas. But I go back to the level of frustration, and the frustration really comes when people do not feel supported, and also in hostile environments, and really not able to do the work that they were hired to do. And I've seen that many times, and therefore I've seen people leave as a result of that. So what I think is important is when you are frustrated, that it can lead to chronic illnesses, because we're not just talking about, remember, the kind of up and down frustration. We're talking about a high level of frustration that people maintain. And when it becomes chronic, it becomes problematic for you, not only physically and or mentally. So you want to make sure that you begin to address it personally. And I think about saying to people, then go do things that make you happy. I was like, if you read, then read. If you play pickleball, then play pickleball, which is new now. Do whatever you need to do to bring it down, because if you don't, then there are going to be problems. And it's not going to be other people, it's going to be you. And so that's why you have to really think about it. What I really also want to say is the second thing is that there are starting to be more support groups, more DE&I organizations that have conferences, that have phone calls. Connect yourself with other DE&I professionals for support. I've done a couple of those through an organization. Let me just say really quick, we had a presentation at a conference back in May. It was called The Care and Feeding of DE&I Professionals. I had 150 people sign up for a pre-conference workshop. I was overwhelmed because they come from across the country. But that's how serious people are feeling right now. And so we really had some great interactions around that, how to stay in the profession because we don't want you to leave, but also how to do the work that needs to be done up and down and walk away, do what you got to do. And from an HR perspective, take your vacation, take your leave, get away, and then come back and do the work.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing those strategies. And Dr. Jones, what strategies can institutions implement to prevent and address DEI burnout among faculty, staff, and students?
Well, the first thing is that it needs to be strategically embedded in the goals and the plans of the institution. Because that way, when you start in at the top, at the very, everybody, then it flows down to departments, and it flows down to schools, it flows down to the faculty, it flows down to the staff, but it has to be embedded into that strategic plan, and it can't be performative. It has to make sense. So along with that, strategically embedding it, there must be clear policies and procedures of what that means. What does this mean? It can't be just something that you put on a piece of paper and then you behind the scenes, you're checking off the box. It has to be something that's sustainable. It has to be something that everybody understands. And everybody is working toward the same goal. And when people sit down, like I know that, different areas, like your areas or your schools or whatever, may come up with a strategic plan periodically. So when that happens, sit down and have a conversation when it deals with this. If it's strategically embedded in there, what does that mean for this group? What does that mean for this office? What does that mean for this school? So everybody is on the same page. And then to go with that are some policies that if you're not doing this, what does that mean? When you're not, and then evaluate the work that you're doing based on what the strategic plan is saying that you should be doing when it comes to this work, where everybody's doing the same thing. I think that we have to be committed to those initiatives that we create. Everybody has to be committed. And I think a lot of that, with that commitment comes with understanding, just like the strategic plan piece. You have to understand the initiatives. You have to understand what that means for your areas, for your students, for everybody. Everybody has to be on the same page. And I think that when you have a lot of turnover, particularly for marginalized faculty, staff, or students leaving the institution, you need to understand why. You need to take time to understand why, but then you need to create an environment and focus on their retention. So you may have this great plan to get these numbers up in all these different communities, but what are you doing to keep them there? You need to be understanding why they leave, how can you keep them there, and why those that stay stays. You need to be able to understand that. So those are just some quickies.
Yeah, those are good. Those are really good. Before opening it up for questions, I have a final question for all of our panelists. What can allies and individuals who are not directly affected by the DEI issues do to support those who are without contributing to burnout?
I'm going to be quick and I'm going to say this. Don't allow me to be the only voice. I need you to use your voice. Use your voice, because sometimes what I say is seen, received differently than when somebody else different than me says it. So I need you to use your voice and for me, not me be the person that's doing it.
Very good.
I would love to. I want to be clear that people understand what an ally is. It's a different definition now. It's a clear definition. It's a verb. If you can't say you're an ally and not do anything, JJ, you just said that. And you can't call yourself an ally if you're not doing something to support. And then you need to ask your DE&I professionals, what can I do to support you? I'm sure they could rattle off a whole series of things that they would appreciate that you would do. But if you're not doing anything, then you're not an ally.
Important. Model the way, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I would even push this a little further to say, just because you're not directly impacted, these issues do impact you, right? This isn't a zero-sum game when people of color and people within these marginalized communities or traditionally historically underrepresented communities, when they succeed, I can't win. That's not the conversation. Unfortunately, legislators will try to push that agenda. When like these people are taking our jobs, these people are doing these different things, and it's not true at all. Like during the civil rights movement, when that was an era for Black and brown people to come up, there were white women who benefited more from these policies than the people that they were initially intended and designed for. So like there is no, we all can win in this battle together, but as they said before me, like you have to speak up, you have to use your voice. It may not directly impact you, but it will impact the way your business operates. It will impact the type of employees you get. It impacts the world, right? And the society, and it continues to create systemic issues that we will continually have to deal with, or our children or our children's children will deal with. And so just use your voice, speak up, show up at the Capitol. It's just because it's a DEI issue doesn't mean that you cannot advocate and speak about how this will impact your life and how it impacts others. And so, yeah, to what the other people have said, be an ally, do actually say something will be helpful. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And we do have some additional questions that were not planned ahead of time in our chat. I'm just going to go down the chat here for whoever submitted them first. And the first question is from Dana Jacqueline from Frito-Lay. Hi, Dana. I'm glad you're on here today. What are some of the workarounds that you've considered to ensure that you can still move the DEI agenda forward without using the language of DEI? Anyone want to jump in?
I'm going to jump in just to just kind of, I mean, we didn't foresee this all well, we kind of did, but we didn't, when we changed the name of our office used to be Multicultural Student Affairs. Now it's Social Change and Intercultural Engagement. So that could be a whole lot of other things. So that's one of the things that we did, but we didn't do it particularly for that, but we were trying to be forward thinking in the work that we did, because it was more than just the DEI work, but it's included in that. So that's one of the things that we did.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, let me also say that the whole idea was to incorporate the DE&I principles into the workplace. You create this inclusive workplace by incorporating those principles. So if you understand, like I said, you had to be clear about the definition of ally. If you're clear about the definition of what diversity looks like, then create that. Institutionalize the practices that create a diverse workplace, and then you still have the same results. Equity, it doesn't have to be called equity, but you know what it looks like. I always say employees know what fair looks like, and they can define it for you. So then let's create those workplaces that are fair. And so really, if we can't use the words per se, and I'm still going to use inclusive and belonging because I love those words, and those are always going to be words that I think are important, but I think you have to just institutionalize the practices into the things that you do day to day. That's really, that's the homage, if you will, to DE&I. That's how we make sure that it continues.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Kimberly, did you want to add anything to that?
Great points. I would just say that, like, it doesn't matter what you change the name to. People are always going to have something to say about it. It really doesn't. I agree with all the points. Do the work, right? At the end of the day, just do the work. But yeah, whatever you change the name with, the next 5 years from now, we're fussing about another word that does something that makes some people uncomfortable, right? And so, like, do the work is the best part, and make sure that the outcomes are equitable. Look at the data, do the research, see what's happening, right? And if you can't use the language, but know that it doesn't matter if we called it sunshine. In 5 years, there'll be a ban on sunshine. You know, it doesn't really matter. But as long as we're doing the work, we're tracking our progress. That's what matters the most.
I like that, Kimberly. Just do the work, even if it's called sunshine.
Can I just reiterate just really quick, Crystal?
Sure, absolutely.
The data piece, I'm just so glad that you are emphasizing that. I think that is so important. I don't think we've done enough of it. We're doing more of it, but if you're a DE&I professional, data becomes your friend. So I just appreciate your and the fact that you are collecting data. I wrote your name down because I want to see and hear the results of some of that data that we're actually going to be using probably to continue the work that we do. So thank you.
Yeah, important point. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. All right, we have another question here. This is from Brittany Coe. Brittany asks, is there a roadmap that you could recommend? For example, first step is a statement or policy, then implementation of XYZ. She says that she has a committee in her office, but consistency is challenging because we are chairing our committee in addition to our daily duties, and there are times when not everyone has the same capacity to pour into the vision. Do y'all have any thoughts or advice for Brittany?
I always have something to say. I think that one of the things is understanding people's bandwidth, but you need to have committed people, because people that are committed, they're going to make the time to get the work done. So I think I'm not saying that the people that are currently on the committee are not committed, but you need people that are committed and that's going to make the time, even if that time may not be during work hours. It may be after hours, but you need committed folk that's going to be there to get the work done. And that's where it starts, with making sure, and then you have to really understand the culture of your workplace or your organization when you're creating that committee and the work that you're trying to do. You need to understand that, because what works here may not work somewhere else. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Cheryl?
Just one more thing. Yeah, leadership. You have to make sure that leadership is supporting your efforts. So a DE&I statement without any without people supporting it is not helpful. What you want are your leaders to sit down with your leaders and be really clear that they are supporting your DE&I efforts. And I'll give you an example. Having the DE&I committee monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly meet with the leadership to have that conversation. We did that when I first started in the city, and the committee was always honored to be able to sit with the city manager and talk to the city manager about the things that they felt were important as related to DE&I. So you can't just have a committee and your leadership over here. The leadership has to be visible and involved in that. And that motivates people to continue to want to participate.
I think to add on to that, like buying into the shared value and goal, leadership, buy-in and their power to enforce it, right? But then also back to what we said in a few conversations ago, measurable things like, what does this look like? How can we implement this into everyone's projects and tasks? Like DEI isn't a one person, one committee thing. It's a part of like what we do. How are we analyzing contracts? Who are we reaching out to? How are we recruiting people? Like actually implement measurable increment things into people's work that should already be there, by the way, but it hasn't traditionally been there. So make sure that we are adding legs to what we are saying, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great perspectives. Any other questions? I don't see any more questions in the chat, although I do see that Dana is changing her title to Director of Sunshine. So thank you for that inspiration, Kimberly.
And this is Heather. Sorry, I had one sent directly to me, and
Okay.
I think would actually be a good one to wrap us up. This will probably be our last question, but we talked obviously a lot about, feeding and caring for our DE&I professionals, as Cheryl put it. Are there good resources, whether that be books, whether that be podcasts, or truly maybe this goes more towards, do you have a mentor that you would recommend to those on the call to kind of further this conversation, but also to take care of themselves? Because a lot of these folks are leading the charge. And I'd love to hear that from all of you if you have something to share.
I would say this, in taking care of yourself, and I always tell this to students, to give yourself to yourself before you give yourself away. If you're not at a point that you can help yourself, you can't help anybody. And sometimes you have to seek what you need for yourself, because what I need to revive me, to energize me, for me to continue on this work may not be what you need. So I'm going to say that, give yourself to yourself before you give yourself away, and you find your smiley place, your sunshine place. Like Kimberly said, you need to find that, because indeed everybody's different. There's a lot of books, a lot of things out there that you can Google and find, but you have to make sure that it fits you, because you're taking care of you in the way that best fits you. So that's my 5 cents.
Love it. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Cheryl or Kimberly, you want to answer the final question? Any resources?
Yeah, the National Diversity Council is probably one of the best resources. There are, I hate to say this, but I'm going to anyway. There's some bootleg kinds of things out there you want to be very careful about. What you really want is solid. Like, for instance, when I was looking for a certificate program, there's lots of certificate programs, but Cornell is probably one of the best, well done. And so you really want to make sure that you're finding resources that really understand the work you're doing and can provide support, and then creating those support groups for yourself. Because what I found in pulling folks together is that they had ideas that each other shared. I don't think there's anything more powerful than a support group that says, this is what I've done. These were the things that didn't work for me, did work for me, so that you can go off. So again, the National Diversity Council is one that has legitimate quality programming, a little expensive, but it depends on what you're wanting to do. And then being careful about your Googling, making sure the resources are indeed good quality resources.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I see that Heather has dropped the link to the National Diversity Council in the chat, if anyone wants to click on that to review that resource after the panel. Kimberly, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm a strong advocate for therapy. Get you a therapist. Like, this work is hard. Therapy, prayer, meditation, whatever you need this work is hard. And if you don't take care of yourself, we all have trauma. We all have things that we need to deal with. And so first thing, make sure your mental health is okay. And then I guess there are 2 books that we're reading in our office. I get paid to read, y'all. One of them is Rest is Resistance. And so look that up. And another one is Racial Justice at Work. Those are 2 books that we are currently reading. I have not gotten through them, so they may not be the best, but I've heard great things about them and we're reading them, so I trust it. So yes, therapy, read, and then go to resource places.
Great. Thank you all. I mean, it's been an honor to just moderate and hear all these perspectives today. I think some of the reminders I've taken away is just modeling the way, the reminder to do that. Cheryl, incorporating data, that's so important to remember that in the process. And also just that DEI is everyone's work. Thank you for these great reminders today. And thank you, Plano Chamber, for asking me to moderate. And thank you so much, panelists, for all the important work that you're doing. And I'm going to turn it back over to Heather.
Awesome. Thank you, Crystal. I just wanted to give another round of applause. It was an incredible discussion. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the entire of the Plano Chamber, to Cheryl, to Dr. Jones, and to Kimberly for taking the time out to share your expertise, to be vulnerable as well, and just be honest with our group. We appreciate that. So those of you on the call, you may notice it's recording. So we'll get this recording sent out to those that might not have been able to join us. I was trying to shoot some things out in the chat to share those resources. So I'll compile that into one email so that you have all of that as well. And then feel free to reach out to myself. If you want to get in connection with these ladies, I know that I spoke with them prior to, and they said that they would love to stay connected if they're able to, if you guys have more questions or just want to pick their brains. But again, thank you on behalf of the Plano Culture and Inclusion Alliance. I want to give one more thank you to our yearly sponsors, because again, this would not be possible if we did not have their support, so that we could dedicate staff time and really valuable resources to these conversations. So again, thank you to Toyota, to Frito-Lay, to Capital One, and SMU for sponsoring, and to our lovely and amazing group of advisory council leaders that helped pick this topic for this month. So we will be joining you guys hopefully next month, but definitely again in November for another topic. So just stay on the lookout. If you are not already receiving our emails, again, reach out to me. My name again is Heather at the Plano Chamber. And with that, we'll conclude, and I'll let you guys go about the rest of your day. So thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, panelists.